Welcome everyone to the Women's Major Group's VNR for Gender Equality webinar today. That we're very excited to be with all of you. We'll have an amazing group of speakers that will be with us today. So before we begin, I just want to make the announcement that we have interpretation available in Spanish, French, Russian, and English. Please select the appropriate channel in the little globe at the bottom of your screens. Could we do the same announcement in French first, please?
Bonjour, cette réunion dispose d'un service d'interprétation en français. Pour pouvoir écouter le français, cliquez sur l'icône en forme de globe en bas de votre écran. Choisissez français et vous pouvez couper l'audio original. Depuis un smartphone, cliquez sur les 3 petits points et choisissez interprétation de langue. Merci, bonne réunion.
Merci. Could we do it now in Spanish, please?
Sí. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Proveeremos interpretación en español. Si están conectados desde su computador, abajo a mano derecha, hagan clic en el globo que dice interpretación, elijan su idioma de preferencia, por favor silencien el audio original y eso es todo. En su teléfono, abajo a mano derecha, hagan clic en los 3 puntos que dicen más, elijan su idioma de preferencia y después toquen finalizar. Las instrucciones están en el chat. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Gracias. We also have Russian that Valentina will be telling all of us in Russian in a few seconds. We are recording this meeting, so it can become a resource for all of us throughout the year until we go to the HLPF 2022. It will be uploaded to our YouTube and social media. And as in all Women's Major Group meetings, discriminatory remarks, hate speech, the denial of self-proclaimed identities, anti-rights discourse, and other forms of discrimination against the folks and groups here will not be tolerated. We will be giving one warning, and then if the person doesn't comply again, they'll be removed from Zoom. So without further ado, please allow me to give the floor to the Women's Major Group Europe and Central Asia Co-op and the President of the Gender Centru Moldova, Valentina Bodrug. Thank you, Valentina. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shehnaz. Thank you to all. Greetings, everyone. And we are very happy to be joined by so many feminist and women's rights activists from the world and today's session. The Women's Major Group is an intersectoral global feminist collective created in 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and an official participant in the United Nations processes on sustainable development. The Women's Major Group has a responsibility to facilitate women's civil society active participation, information sharing, and inputs into the policy space provided by United Nations. The Women's Major Group is self-organized and open to all interested organizations working to promote women's rights-based sustainable development, but which focus on women's human rights, empowerment of women, and gender equality. On the primary work area for Women's Major Group and its member is a voluntary national review that takes place each year at the high-level political forum and some of the regional sustainable development forums as the main monitoring and review tool for the achievement of the Agenda 2030. Next, please. In 2020, as the pandemic becomes the central reality in our life, we undertaken a survey on VNR participation of our members, including the impacts of the pandemic. And today I would like to share only some points from this survey. It's very, very important to mention that only 25% of organizations that have responded to the survey were actively involved in their country's VNR process. Also, it's important to mention that enable feminist civil society organization participation in VNR process. It was very, very useful as 56 active national coalition platform and 43 past participation in national, regional, and global VNR process. Also, 37 participation in the Women's Major Group or other global regional VNR and SDG network. It was really excellent tool to improve the capacity and continue to the VNR process at the regional and global level. And from this survey and our experience over the last 6 years, we would like to recommend the following to member states and the United Nations for an effective VNR participation for feminist and women's rights organizations. Support feminist groups at national level to be able to have meaningful participation in VNR process. Strengthen the capacity of feminist group to be enabled to participate in VNR process at national, regional, and global level. Ensure all small feminist groups are involved in the process as well as those in the capital and big city. Support the dissemination of the alternative VNR reports developed by feminist civil society. It was an introductory component, but now I would like to give the floor to our experts, to our speakers. And our first speaker is Marion Barthelemy. Marion is the director of the Office of Intergovernmental Support and Coordination of Sustainable Development of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA. Before joining the division, she was director of the Division for Public Administration and Development Management, DESA, from 2016 to 2017. Before, she was as chief in the Intergovernmental Support Branch at the Division for Sustainable Development at the same department. In this capacity, she was part of the team supporting the negotiation of the 2030 agenda. At the beginning of her career, Marion worked as an economist in the Division for the Advancement of Women in DESA and later in the UN Drug Control Program. Marion joined at UN in 1987 through the National Competitive Exam for Economists and studied in Sciences Po in Paris. It's very powerful biography. Marion, thank you very much that you are joined to our discussion. Could you tell us the United Nations side of the Voluntary National Review, the changes after the ECOSOC and HLPF review process we've been through earlier this year, and the opportunity it presents for the participation of feminist and women's rights organizations? You have the floor.
Thank you, Valentina, and thank you to the major groups on women for inviting me. As you said, I have a particularly warm feeling towards the women major group because I started my careers and I worked 5 years supporting the Commission on the Status of Women, which was at the time in Vienna. And I have the greatest respect for the organizations, you know, I know well, and I feel the Women's Major Group is also highly professional in its questions and its engagement in the HLPF. So I continue to be impressed by this group. So I'm going to talk about the high-level political forum on sustainable development with which you are all familiar. And it has really established its role as the top UN platform for reviewing the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. And it's a little bit the home of the major groups and other stakeholders, because from the outset, the General Assembly gave important entitlements and rights to the major groups, such as the right to participate in all official meetings, but also the right to make recommendations. I think we can move, yes, to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the recent review of the HLPF by the General Assembly, which showed the importance also of preserving and promoting the rights of the major groups and other stakeholders in the HLPF. Then I will talk about the July 2021 HLPF and how gender equality and women's empowerment featured in the meeting, and then finish with remarks on your participation in the voluntary national reviews. So first, the General Assembly review of the HLPF. So this review was completed last June, and there was a resolution that was adopted on the HLPF 75/290B. And when the review started, which was in January 2020, some delegations and the major groups, of course, wanted to use the review to increase the role of the major groups and other stakeholders in the HLPF. But instead, they were rapidly concerned because the major groups and other stakeholders were not even allowed to attend the consultations. But this changed when the review restarted during the 75th session. Because of COVID-19, it had to be suspended. And at that point, major groups and other stakeholders were able to intervene in the consultations with the new co-facilitators. But I must say they were very difficult negotiations about the role of major groups and other stakeholders and the references to gender. But ultimately, the resolution preserved the entitlements of major groups and other stakeholders and even made some small advances on their participation in the HLPF. A new recommendation, for example, is that countries consider including major groups and other stakeholders in their delegations on the VNRs at the HLPF, as some countries have done. And there is also a recognition of the local dimension, which is important in the HLPF and also in the review of the implementation of the SDGs. More generally, the resolution also provided some guidance for improving further the voluntary national reviews. And it recommended, for example, that they should be inclusive and engage stakeholders. There were new ideas, such as the possibility for countries to provide written answers to questions that they couldn't address during the HLPF. And very often, actually, the questions of major groups and other stakeholders are not really answered during the HLPF. So this opens the door for written responses. Let me move to my second point, which is how gender equality and women's empowerment featured in the July 2021 HLPF. So I remember last year it was the same, actually, that the findings that we derive from the reports on the VNRs are different from the findings that you derive from the reports from the women's and feminist organizations. But the vast majority of the VNRs presented at the July 2021 HLPF addressed gender equality and women's empowerment. And the main issues in the VNR reports, including in the analysis of the response to COVID-19, related to the number of women represented in government positions, unpaid work and the domestic labor of women, gender-based violence, gender income and wealth inequalities. And there was quite a lot also on the use of technology, access to technology in the context of the response to COVID-19 also. In the declaration of the HLPF, SDG5 also featured quite well, and the key points included first a reaffirmation of the commitment to gender equality, women's empowerment, and the full realization of women's human rights and how those should be mainstreamed in the implementation of the SDGs and the reviews. There was a concern in the declaration about the continued obstacles that hold women back, and a strong concern about the impacts of COVID-19 on women through violence, poverty, the impact on livelihoods. The positive side was that there was an emphasis on women's participation as leaders in decision-making, including in the recovery from COVID-19. So they were not seen only as victims, but as leaders. But I must say that the negotiations on the provisions related to gender were difficult, and I sense that they are increasingly difficult in the United Nations. There are huge tensions among the political groups and with some delegations on this issue, and I see now the same is happening in the second committee of the General Assembly. The HLPF was entirely virtual, so in a way it allowed participation from more women's and feminist organizations, you know, from all over the world. We had a large number of participants, and we got feedback that some felt that they had good participation, in particular through the side events. So this leads me to my third point, which is the participation of a women's major group in the voluntary national reviews. And the voluntary national reviews are really a success story of the HLPF. To date, 176 countries have conducted a VNR, and next July there will be 187 now. So the VNRs, they have specific characteristics compared to the universal periodic reviews on human rights. So their ultimate purpose is to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs through peer learning and partnerships. And the countries have a lot of flexibility in defining the process of the VNRs, but there are some principles that are to be respected and that are established in the 2030 agenda. And one of them is inclusiveness. So we can move to the next slide, which shows that many actors are meant to be engaged in the voluntary national reviews besides the central governments. So this includes civil society, including women's organizations, but also parliaments, local governments. We also have supreme audit institutions, and these institutions, they can introduce a high degree of accountability in the VNRs, but they are not, let's say, not often engaged. I would like to make 2 points under the voluntary national reviews. First, there has been engagement of civil society in the voluntary national review, but the levels of engagement vary greatly. So about 75% of the countries that report to the HLPF that reported from 2016 to 2019 noted that non-state actors were engaged in the governance mechanisms related to the voluntary national reviews and to the implementation of the SDGs. And we find that this is a very important and resilient way to include civil society in the SDG implementation and review, it's much stronger than ad hoc consultation, organized one day with the UN country team, for example. Nearly 80% of the reports on the VNRs provided information on multi-stakeholder engagement to nationalize the 2030 agenda so as to increase its ownership. At the same time, from the reports, it's difficult to judge how meaningful the engagement of stakeholders has been. So, for example, in general, the VNR countries report that stakeholders have been engaged through activities related to informing and consulting, and analysis shows that this is the lowest level of engagement. But there are also quite a significant percentage of countries who report on efforts to collaborate with stakeholders in the VNR, so to identify solutions together. There seems to have been a significant increase over the years in the percentage of countries involving civil society in the drafting of the reports. They were 53% last year. But again, it varies, the engagement. Some countries have a section on civil society's views, and others listen to their comment and reflect them in drafting the report, to the extent that they choose to do it. And my second point under the VNRs is how we can increase the engagement of major groups, and including the major group of women and organizations of women and feminist organizations. I think that even within the current mandates, which are not very specific, on the engagement of women's organization, we can strengthen their participation. The DESA produces reporting guidelines on the preparation of the voluntary national reviews, and we stress the need to engage the stakeholders and the various representatives in the voluntary national reviews. Of course, there needs to be a systematic approach by the government to ensure that the stakeholders are adequately engaged. So I mentioned engaging the stakeholders and organizations in the institutions that conduct the VNRs, but there is also the need to consult at various stages to engage a variety of groups and organizations while engaging also those that are representative of many organizations. It's also very important that the governments report on how they engage stakeholders in the report on the VNR. At the moment in DESA, we are developing a database on the good practices in preparing the voluntary national reviews. And a lot of them also relate to engaging major groups and other stakeholders at the national, regional, and global level. And we hope that this will help other countries to do better. So how can you get better engaged in the voluntary national reviews? And I think for organizations at the national level, local level, just even finding the information about the fact that the country is conducted a voluntary national review is sometimes difficult. We have it on our website. We are trying to improve it. And then finding out also who is the focal point for the voluntary national review, and whether there is a multi-stakeholder platform for preparing the VNRs. Those are steps that are important, but there needs to be advice and capacity building, to help smaller organizations to do this. I feel it's maybe good to first try to work with the VNR focal point on the main report so as to influence its content rather than go straight away for a shadow report. But of course, this depends on the country's situation, and there are cases when you know beforehand that it's no use to try to influence the government report. It's also important for the organizations to engage with the coordination mechanism for major groups and other stakeholders, and with the women major groups, because they work together to elaborate the questions that are asked to countries presenting a voluntary national review at the HLPF. And I can tell you, we get a lot of complaints from member states about those questions. But in my view, they are what make the VNR meaningful, you know, much more than questions of other countries who are sometimes orchestrated by the presenting country. I would also encourage you to engage in the multiple voluntary local reviews that are now taking place in many cities, and DESA also prepared guidelines on voluntary local reviews, which include the importance of inclusiveness. We also organize capacity building workshops for major groups and other stakeholders on engaging in the HLPF. But like you mentioned earlier, Valentina, it's important to engage also smaller women's organization, you know, at the local and country level. So once we tried to ask the resident coordinators to help us identify this kind of organization that, you know, sometimes don't even know about even the SDGs or the HLPF. So I think it's an important step. But know that in DESA, we are here to support you, and never hesitate to come up to us with questions and requests. Thank you so much, and thank you to Jan also for supporting the PowerPoint.
Marion, thank you so much for very important and valuable points. But please stay with us so you have some questions and maybe comments after during our next session focused on question and answers. Thank you very much again. And now I would like to offer the floor our next speaker, Sylvia Hordosch. Sylvia is policy advisor in the policy program in the Intergovernmental Division of UN Women. Her current focus of work is follow-up of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and providing technical support to intergovernmental bodies, including the Commission of the Status of Women and the General Assembly. Before joining to UN Women, she worked for the Division of the Advancement of Women and the Office of Special Advisor on Gender Issues. In her work at the United Nations, she was focused on a wide range of issues, including women and decision-making, rural women, women, peace and security, human rights of women, and status of women within the UN system. Prior to her work at the United Nations, she worked for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and for the implementation and for the International Helsinki Federation for Human Rights in Vienna. Sylvia, could you please tell us a bit about a recent guidance note from UN Women on VNRs and how UN Women supports feminist and women's rights organizations to engage within the VNRs at national level? Please, Sylvia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Valentina. It's a delight to be part of this meeting. I've been a long-time fan and collaborator with the Women's Major Group. I keep thinking back of the conversations we had during the Open Working Group when the SDGs were developed. and we've continued cooperating since. I'm very happy to share the work that UN Women has done in support of the voluntary national reviews at different levels. As Marion has said, the voluntary national reviews provide an important opportunity for member states and of course other stakeholders to assess the progress and the gaps in the implementation of all the SDGs. And we of course are very keen to see an assessment from a gender perspective. This means looking at how a gender perspective is mainstreamed in the planning, budgeting, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of national sustainable development strategies and other national plans and policies. And this assessment includes an assessing policy strategies on their implications for women, men, girls, boys, gender non-conforming people of any planned action, whether it's legislation, policies, or budgets. As you all know, the 2030 Agenda makes the very important point that the voluntary national reviews should be people-centered, should be gender-sensitive, should respect human rights, and focus on leaving no one behind. So these are very important principles for us in our support. Just to add a few points to what Marion said about the VNRs of this summer, most presentations made references to gender issues, but I also have to point out that 10 countries in their presentations, which is different from the actual report, actually made no references in their presentations to the HLPF. But a good number of countries did talk about linkages between national priorities and gender equality. There were some references to mainstreaming, to developing broad normative frameworks to achieve gender equality. There were references also to women's economic empowerment, decent work, but also the gender pay gap, the need for financial inclusion. A few countries also talked about sexual and reproductive health and rights. And of course, as Marion mentioned, also gender-based violence and unpaid care and domestic work. And all these issues are important in the support that we give to national governments. So as I said, what we really look forward for when we engage is to what extent do governments reflect national gender equality plans, strategies? Do they make the linkages between sustainable development strategies and gender equality strategies? To what extent do they analyze progress on SDG 5? But also, do they make linkages between SDG 5 and the other SDGs? I'm personally always very concerned when people seem to suggest the center of the 2030 Agenda for Women and Girls is SDG 5. Certainly a really important goal, no doubt. But what we need to address is also the linkage between SDG 5 and the other 16 goals. And the agenda itself says that gender mainstreaming is a crucial element. We also look at the extent to which national gender equality mechanisms are engaged, whether these are gender equality ministries, gender observatories that exist in some countries, parliamentary committees on gender equalities, the whole range of national mechanisms. Are they a part of the VNR process? I have mentioned budgets before. So we are also looking for whether gender responsive budgeting is used as a tool in developing the VNRs. And as you may know, UN Women has done a lot of work around gender statistics, gender data, disaggregation of data by sex and other factors. So this is certainly an important element of preparing VNRs. And as you know, an important challenge also. So what we do at the regional and at the country levels, we work to support strengthening institutional capacities for the integration of a gender perspective in national policies and plans. We also engage at the New York level with delegations. We do briefings to share with them priorities for mainstreaming agenda perspectives in the VNRs, and we usually have also a CSO representative in these briefings, from a women's organization. We often work with the women's major group to identify a speaker. We have developed a guidance note, which the initial and the main purpose of that guidance note was really to support our own country and regional offices, but I'm very pleased that you are providing publicity to that tool. The point of the note is really to give some basic guidance to our colleagues, including issues that overlap with what Marion said before. We at the country level, UN Women works through the UN country team. So the goal is to have a coordinated one UN approach in supporting national governments. But of course, so we ask our colleagues at the country level to identify who the lead ministries are, what kind of national coordination mechanisms exist to prepare the VNR, to make those linkages, but then also to make the linkages between the gender equality mechanism and other ministries, national coordination bodies. We strongly advocate for an alignment between national budgets to ensure that there are adequate resources. And then just to reiterate what was said before, the importance of engaging all stakeholders. And this is a very strong focus for us on civil society, on women's organizations at the national level, but also at local levels. And in different countries, we have been able to support consultations between women's organizations and facilitate linkages between the national mechanism and the consultations of CSOs, and also helping to facilitate that the recommendations that come out of the civil society consultations feed into the national process of drafting and preparing the VNR. And I believe Moldova was an example where we were able to do that. In Palestine, our country office was able to organize a multi-stakeholder consultation, which included, of course, civil society organizations. In some countries, we were able to also, through our engagement or a long-standing cooperation with the Ministry on Gender Equality, to build linkages between the ministry and other line ministries. As I've said before, we encourage in this engagement work across all the SDGs. We have found in our analysis in the past that usually years where SDG 5 is on the agenda, it will get more attention than in other years, but really it should be part of the VNR process every year, not just when it is under review. An important point is also making linkages between the VNRs and other national review processes. Many countries have done national reports for Beijing +25. So it would seem logical to build linkages between the findings that were put together. I'll be done in a minute. In those reports and the VNR process. Another example would be the CEDAW reports that should be coming together. I'll leave it at here, but also to remind all of you that the VNRs are really a cycle. You know, it's about doing the assessment, presenting the status of the country, identifying gaps and good practices, and then focus on the implementation of these reports. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Over to you, Valentina.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It was very important recommendations that I really think it useful for our organization. Thank you so much. And now I would like to mention that Marion mentioned earlier about major groups and other stakeholders coordination mechanism who work on concrete issues VNR process. And this mechanism support a lot civil society organization from VNR countries, which valuable experience. And now I would like to offer the floor to Rina, my colleague, who co-leads the VNRs task group of the major groups and other stakeholders coordination mechanism. Rina. Rina is Deputy Regional Coordinator for Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, a feminist membership-based organization in Asia and the Pacific. She is currently the Women's Major Group organizing partner for Asia and co-chair for Asia Pacific Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism, and one of the co-lead of VNR task group and the major group of and other stakeholders coordination mechanism. Rina, you have a lot of excellent experience. How does the major group and other stakeholders coordination mechanism support civil society organization in the VNR process? Moreover, as you also have a regional expertise, could you please mention the Asia Pacific region, the Asia Pacific Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism, how they support the VNR process? Specifically, we have one question addressed by our colleague in the chat. Thank you, Rina, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Valentina. And then before I start on the question that Valentina raised, I actually just want, I'm happy to be here with Sylvia. And then also Sylvia actually saying things that very resonate to what I also felt about the VNR. One is about totally agree with you, Sylvia, on SDG 5. And then it's not like that we are going to only look into SDG 5 when it's under review, you know, and then it's really interconnected. And then one of the biggest win, I think, for the Women Major Group is actually to have a dedicated goal on SDG 5, but also to ensure that it's also linked and there and cut across the other SDG. And then I think that Women Major Group have been really believe in holistic approach of looking at all our SDGs. So we are in our review, in our position paper, when we are submitting it to UN DESA, to HLPF, we are not actually only reviewing the SDG under review, but all of the SDG. And then it's really important. And then I think that you also mentioned a very correct. We actually have our position paper for the HLPF review, where we talk about the VNR, what we think that the HLPF should be. And then one thing that we said, that HLPF should not be seen only for that 8 days of, or follow up and review. It's only 8 days of that in New York, event, but it should be seen as the whole year cycle, where we actually able to link the national level VNR, the sub-regional, the regional, and then to the global. So it's not an easy task, we know. And then for me, aside from being the Women Major Group organizing partner, we are also the Women Major Group is part of the Major Group and other stakeholders coordination mechanism. And then just a little bit of review about this MGoS coordination mechanism, we call it. It's comprised of representatives of autonomous social groups and constituencies that refer as the major group and other stakeholder. And then we actually have a fundamental principles for our engagement, which we agreed together by consensus. One is about centrality for human rights for all as the critical cornerstone. The second is the utmost commitment to gender equality, to social, economic, ecological, climate, gender, racial, and intergenerational justice, right? And then the third one, how we also recognize the inherent interconnectedness of all domains of life that require systemic and holistic responses in both policy making and program development and implementation. And then also how we also see the centrality of inclusive and democratic multilateralism centered on the United Nations and based on people-centeredness, equity, and justice. So as you may know, that major group and other stakeholder is also expanding. Yeah, that is, we actually, our mandate is mostly about, how this group, the coordination mechanism is become autonomous, self-organizing, that have a self-determination for coordination among the civil society and other constituencies, not only civil society, and committed to the advancement of the 2030 agenda and its follow-up and review process, but also with special but non-inclusive reference to the preparation, all year round preparation for the high-level political forum on sustainable development. So we are mandated to actually ensuring that we facilitate the major group and other stakeholder engagement in this kind of process, especially in the global level. Yeah. And then, of course, that we now expand. So first of all, the major group is actually 9, right? As identified in Agenda 21, we have women, children and youth, indigenous peoples, NGO, local authorities, workers and trade unions, business and industries. Also, there's a science and technology community and farmers. But of course, after the conversation in the Rio +20 outcome and some other resolution that we have in terms of the high-level political forum, we start expanding, right? Because we said that 9 major groups are not enough when we want to leave no one behind. We actually really want to include the other stakeholder, which consists of older person, local communities, education and academic entities, person with disabilities, volunteer group. And then also we expand it a little bit more again to other stakeholders that active in sustainable development. So for instance, like those mechanism in the region that is actually already established to facilitate inclusive engagement into the Regional Sustainable Development Forum. So now we have the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, we have the ECE RSEM, we have the ECA RSEM, and then we also have the open thematic mechanism that facilitate inclusive engagement of and that actually relate to the 2030 agenda. Yeah, so it's also include the financing for development process, the Sendai framework process, and etc. So imagine from 9, yeah, major group, we are expanding because we want to be inclusive to now become. Now I think that the latest one is 21 of the major group and other stakeholder group. So basically on that, I think that it is important for us to understand the nature of the coordination mechanism because we want to work collaboratively, yeah, and then inclusively. And then how are we supporting the VNR process? First of all, there needs to be understanding of the principle of collaboration. So first of all, that what we do from the major group and other stakeholder coordination mechanism, we created a VNR task group that made up of the focal points from diverse constituencies or groups in the MGoS itself. So for instance, the women major group have their own focal points, and then also the region have their own focal points, and people with disability, they all volunteer to say that, yes, we're going to help because it's a big work to actually engage with this and then prepare and then also support this VNR process. So first of all, we established that VNR task group, and then each of the focal point will engage with the key actors within the VNR countries, meaning that we are going to, the focal point are assigned and mandated to actually support specific civil societies group in the VNR countries that want to engage with the VNR. And then what we are aiming is actually before, I think when I was first joined, you know, like the HLPF back in 2016, 2017, I remember that the conversation, you know, when we are actually want to make the statement or the question that that Marion said that raised a lot of critics, yeah, or comments from the member state, is actually that time it's done in the actual HLPF. So I remember that time, those who come to the HLPF, we gather in one room and then we make the statement together, especially those who come in from the same country. But after that, we learned that it's not probably inclusive enough, because it means that we only going to do that for those who actually attending the HLPF in New York. So we actually open up and then having a more remote participation and collaborative input through online tools. So for instance, we put like survey, we ask people to actually put their question and then their issues in the survey and etc. And then we, as an VNR task group, start to connect and engage in the dialogue with the civil society organization prior to the HLPF. That's also our role, to actually have an understanding about the process, especially, right, of the VNR, and then also to connect those who are actually already active in the VNR process in the national level, and those who are really new and but want to contribute. So this is something that is very important for us to understand. A lot of us, you know, a lot of national organization is already engaged in the VNR process. And then a lot of them is actually already making their own alternative report, or they have like a good connection with the government. They probably already working with the government together. But we also have to understand the nature, you know, of the engagement in the national level is varied. It really depends on the openness and also the situation in each of the country. There is a lot of issues, I think, where some indigenous people's community not able to engage directly with the government, or LGBTIQ community cannot directly engage with the government. So that is why that we actually need to open up and then making sure that there's a connection between those who have engaged and then those who haven't, right? And then we actually put together bringing national issues highlighted by civil society at the grassroots level to the HLPF. There's a collaboration for making the questions or the statements together. It is something that is not easy. It's a very, very difficult task. And then it's also challenging when all of this major group, all of this group that want to raise that issue, but also limited with 2-minute statement in the that needs to be written. So it's something that it's very, very challenging. And then I must say that the VNR cannot be the end, it's part of the process. It's part of the tools for us for doing advocacy, but it's really not the end of our advocacy because it will never be enough, especially in the HLPF. And then the statements at the HLPF then delivered by the representative of the National Civil Society. And then also in all of this, we liaise with UN Secretariat on the process. Valentina, am I over time? Because you're giving me like sign. Oh yes, is it over time? Okay, I'm really sorry. So okay, just a few quick key steps, Valentina, and just want to share that for this year, for the next year, 2022, the major group and other stakeholder coordination mechanism and the VNR task group is actually planning to sort of like have a prepared earlier rather than last year. So what we are going to do, please watch out an email from us, because there will be, instead of like doing it next year, we are actually planning to have a call for interest and then doing some survey by the end of this year, by 20 December to be exact. And then there will be a series of webinar that we are actually planning to do in January and February to outline the process and then connecting the stakeholder in each VNR countries. And then also we are going to make sure that this is going to happen very soon. So one quick thing, Valentina, you mentioned about the regional level. I'm just want to say that it is very important because, like I said, that we need to connect the national, regional, and the global level processes, especially for the follow-up and review. And then in my region, in Asia and the Pacific, actually what we are trying to push for is the regional VNR. And then I think that the Women Major Group position paper on the HLPF review is really clearly outlined the need for us to actually start talking about the VNR in the region. And then it has been done, because in ESCAP, for instance, there's an effort at least to actually have like some of the countries to present first in the regional level, with also some inputs coming from those countries who have present their VNR. So there's a sharing of exchange. And then what we want is actually those who have reporting in the HLPF, the next year they should report back in the regional forum. So this is something that it is very important for us to put forward. And I'm going to stop at that and looking forward for the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Irina. It was very useful, your perspective to global and regional level for all of us. But we need to go to the next speaker in order to offer the space visibility to our Women's Major Group, and specifically to our member who have a very interesting experience in the frame of Women's Major Group. And this I would like to offer floor to Svetlana Slesarenok. She represented Ukraine. Svetlana started her journey in citizen movement in 1996. She organized the first women's group. She was a leader of protesting movement in community Luzanovka. She organized together with other women the protest against the local authority. She works on sustainable development, spatial planning, sustainable development with the Black Sea Women's Group. In December 2002, she was hired by the Gold Pearls and was recognized as Odessa's Woman of 22 years. Svetlana, could you please tell us about you and your organization experience before, during, and after Ukraine VNR in 2020? how did you go? And what was helpful, what was not helpful in this process? You have the floor. Thank you, Svetlana.
Are you hear me?
Yeah, thank you, Svetlana, please.
I apologize for some difficulties. I am on way from Kiev to Odessa, but answer to your question, first of all, it was very helpful to participate in our regional process. It gave a lot, first of all, guidelines, first of all, communication with our organization on East and Central Europe, and it gave us vision and helped a lot to participate in national process. It was very helpful. First of all, we participated in a national communication. We had in Ukraine 4 webinars, and we have the possibility to give our input, to give our recommendation to Ukrainian government, and we were oriented from the humanitarian approach, gender approaches, and we see from national VNR that there are SDGs which will be achieved in time, and there are of SDGs which are in process, but have difficulties to achieve. But we have big amount of this SDG which cannot be achieved to 2030. First of all, this is environmental SDGs. We made good analysis for, first of all, for environmental SDGs, and give our reaction to our government. And our reaction was integrated into national VNR in the Department of Public Participation, and with some additions to the VNR. And thank you, our colleagues, first of all, our women's major group. I have the possibility to participate in time of when Ukraine reported his VNR, and we have the possibility, had our 2 minutes with our remark and recommendation. Thank you for this possibility. And if you have some question, please give to me. I will answer with big pleasure.
Svetlana, thank you very much for your efforts and for your dedication, because it was very interesting, your experience. We have the same experience in Moldova, that women's major group supported our efforts during the HLPF, specifically VNR presentation of our country. It was very, very useful to work at local, regional, and global level. And we really have a very interesting experience in this, and we can sharing this experience with other colleagues from other countries. Thank you, Svetlana. And in this context, I would like to mention another our colleague, Ana Lima, from Uruguay. She has a very interesting experience from 2021 VNR in Uruguay. Who is Ana? Ana is a lawyer, feminist, former judge, defenders of the women's and girls' rights. She worked as a UN consultant to incorporate the guide to stereotypes and international human rights standards in the justice system. She currently serves as coordinator of CLADEM Uruguay. She has been the co-editor on behalf of CLADEM Uruguay of the alternative reports to the CIDO, DESA, APU Third Committee. Anna, I would like to ask you about VNR process in Uruguay, how the VNR process worked, specifically considering the impacts of COVID pandemic on the process. You also represent the question of civil society during VNR review at HLPF 2021 to the government. And how did the process go? What are your recommendations for feminist and women's rights organization from 2022 VNR country? Thank you, Anna. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. I am very happy to be here with you. I especially want to thank the Women's Major Group, and I thank Amabel Bianco, who in the region has pushed a lot so that we may be able to participate in this process. All women. First, I want to introduce CLADEM. CLADEM is the Latin American and the Caribbean Committee for the Defense of Human Rights of Women. We are in 15 countries in the region. That's why I am the coordinator in Uruguay. That's why I think that it's very important what the other panelists said regarding coordination, the regional coordination, and the work in 3 levels: national, regional, and universal. CLADEM has a lot of work done in shadow reports in the different committees. I don't know if I can share my screen, but first I would like to share with you that in my country, Uruguay, in March of 2020, it took on a new government took power, and it announced that the rights agenda was in my country it will not be touched, and there have been some cuts. What is the participation of civil society in the VNRs? Well, there was none. The government did it with its different bodies. That's why for us, it was very important to be able to participate in the session and to be able to express to the government our main concerns and 3 key questions that I can share. They are in English, and I can share them with you all. What are the suggestions? First, to be very up to date with the SDGs. Also, to understand that the gender and women's human rights perspective has to have an intersection with all of the objectives. That if we talk about peace, we talk about women's rights, we talk about eradicating poverty as well, and same thing as everything else. So to transfer the 5 to all of the other objectives. Objective number 5, for the preparation of the process, reading is very important. Reading what did the countries present. They usually give very long reports. In Uruguay's case, first they sent a summary, which was very poor, very bad, and then a 500-page report 48 hours before our presentation and the session. Hence, we need a group of people who are reading there. And the suggestion that I make is, when we talk in the session where they give us 2 minutes, but we are still unsure whether it would be 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes, minutes or 1 minute to make sure to say exactly what we want to put on the table. I don't know if in that sense what we did was to summarize, to write something that was 1 minute, 7 seconds long and practice it over and over again to then say the most important things. I don't know if I can share my screen.
Okay, yes, just one moment, please.
Yeah, yeah.
You can now.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so here is what we presented. As you can see, there is a brief description of the context with the pandemic, the danger of the achievement of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. Here, what we said was that in our country, which has 3 million and something inhabitants, we had a very tough time with an increase in death, including maternal death rates because of the pandemic, which showed that the measures established by the government were insufficient. We also pointed out the increase of the levels of poverty. In my country, there is 100,000 new poor individuals, job loss, food endangerment, inequalities because of women's domestic work, meaning you stay at home, but the women have been the caretakers, especially in the most vulnerable sectors. We have a national care system, which is a model in the region, but they have placed it in other programs, so that means less resources, and that meant less budget, and definitely it means less attention. Uruguay is the country that allotted the least amount of their gross internal product to tend to the social crisis in the pandemic. From the health point of view, the scientific academy in my country, which I'm very proud of, it showed it very strongly that the attention, the social attention has not been appropriate. So what we asked the government was, how much are you going to give from your gross domestic product to reverse the situation, which is very clear in my country, and how long? And we also asked, and this is very important for the report that is going to be shown now, concrete actions in the gender perspective, Afro-descendants, sexual diversity, migrants, among others, so that the government uses it, because they mention gender in a generic way. And this other question that I think is key, that we think is key, the mechanisms that is going to use to speak with the civil society, for them to be representative and for them to have experience in this topic. I must say that the representative, that was a very, very good experience. I encourage all of us to follow it. Once again, I thank all of us to be for being connected, and that we may have consensus in all levels to be able to achieve it. My country's representative did not answer to me in the session. He said that I was not well informed, but clearly he was not expecting for the civil society to be present, and he was very upset. But I hope to be able to be there in 2022, and that there will be many organizations, and that the regions may be able to show positive experiences.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your very clear points and very valuable experience. Thanks a lot. And now we have an opportunity to start the discussion, but I would like to express my gratitude and to thanks to all our speakers for excellent suggestions, very helpful recommendations. But also I would like to mention that our Sheikhnaz sent specific link, all people, all women, all organizations who like to adhere to be involved in VNR process, they have an opportunity to see the women's major group listserv, and provided, this link was provided by Sheikhnaz in the chat. And now I would like to open the floor for your comments, questions. Our panelists are ready to offer the answers, but please, we have a very short time, 1 minute, not more, please. Who is ready?
Valentina, sorry,
please tell me.
Yeah, there has been questions that have already come in the chat. There was a question to Marion about examples of the issues in the UN regarding gender tensions, to Sylvia about if there are any guidance on how to prepare thematic reports on SDG 4 and 5. And in general, how could we enhance UN women's role at the country level in supporting women's organizations in VNR process? And it does for review, for Beijing Platform for Actions review for CSW annually. And lastly, maybe I'm reading all of them, so maybe our speakers would want to combine them to reply back. Why not we prioritize building and strengthening women's major group at national and subnational level on the local level to really bring the voices for system change mission from the ground level where the real action to take place, to leaving no woman and girl behind. So if any of our speakers would want to continue, and then I do see a hand up, but maybe once we answer these questions, we could come to that. Thank you.
Yes, Sylvia, please. Do you like?
Yes, thank you very much for those questions. I posted also some links in the chat of resources that UN Women has provided, particularly around data issues that you may find useful in your work. The question on how to enhance UN Women's roles at the country level really depends on where we are present. I was looking at the list of VNRs for next year, and it looks like we are present in 18 out of the 45 countries. So that also limits our engagement. But obviously, this is part of our ongoing work and a priority to be supportive to CSOs and support the government. On SDG 5, I do not believe that we have a guidance note on how to prepare a thematic report, but I will double check and get back to Sheikhnaz also. Thank you.
Hi, it's Marion, Valentina. I'm sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand, but I wanted to react to the question that was asked to me. And sometimes, like in the second committee, the mere reference to the impact of COVID-19 on women and girls is refused by some delegations, and the response is, if you include this, I want to include the reference to occupy the territories, which, as you know, will trigger a vote. In the declaration, I think that was negotiated in 2020, there was a reference to the special impact on women and girls, and there was an amendment that was made to also refer to the impact on men. And just to say on SDG 5, indeed in DESA we push for integrated approach to all the SDGs, and there was a whole analysis about entry points, you know, areas where if you intervene, you have an impact across the SDGs because the interlinkages are so strong. And I think the interventions related to the situation of women and girls are such entry point, very strong one, but it was not mentioned in the report of the scientists who prepared this Global Sustainable Development Report. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. If Rina like to add something, or Anna or Svetlana, and then I will offer the floor to Margaret. Yeah.
Okay, I just
Thank
want
you,
to
Margaret,
add,
for patience. Yeah, please.
I just want to answer Shanta maybe. Shanta saying that why not prioritize our building strengthening women major group at national and subnational level onto local level. I think this is exactly what we are trying to do, Shanta, as the women major group, is how best we can support the women's rights organization at the local and national level for the PNR. But also, I also want to emphasize that there is also the importance of, you know, the regional level process, where we actually able to ensure that there's a share of knowledge or understanding about what is happening on the PNR in different countries. And then that is also how we diversify our roles, and not only in the global level, maybe we can strengthen something in the regional level. And I know, Shanta, that you actually already made a women major group in Nepal, which is totally great, right? So this is something that we really need to strengthen in that way. And then also just a quick thing, I just also want to respond a bit on the issue of the shadow report and alternative report. I think that Marion did mention about, you know, how we need to be constructive and then try not to actually have a parallel report. And I did mention that it's not possible in that situation where some of the women issue in the national level cannot be put forward, right? So we really need to find ways to actually look into the systemic issue using our own reporting and indicators. And then that's how we actually able to build our movement for really implementation of the SDG. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rina. And I didn't see Svetlana or Anna. Do you have something, Ed? Or
Sí. Sí, gracias.
later,
Quiero
please.
agregar algo respecto a lo
Yes,
que...
thank you so much. I would like to add something about what Rina was saying a moment ago about the shadow reports. The participation of civil society, where does this fit? This depends on what it is that we're talking about. For example, if we are going to do a shadow report to the CEO committee, we are quite far away. In other words, it needs to be a constructive report, critical. If it's something constructive to the state, not to make them angry, but we are on the side of civil society. Now, in this case that we are talking about SDGs, I believe, Rina, I don't know if you agree or not, I think it's different because we could present our points of views in the report that the state develops, but we need to make sure that they're counted. On another note, we don't need to stop being in the session and propose our questions as civil society. Those are the different roles. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to open the floor, Margaret, but please, we have a very short time. Thank you, Margaret.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
You can hear me. Well, hello, everybody. Amazing what I'm hearing today. And absolutely with you that we've got to get the voices of the unheard up there at the international level and at the national level, from the grassroots up. And again, I don't understand why it is that there has been such a reluctance to ensure that we hear the voices of widows. And I'm struck so much by hearing from you, Anna Lima, about Uruguay and what is happening to the women there, also because of the COVID-19. So it's both conflict now and COVID-19 that's hugely increasing the numbers of widows of all ages. You talk about refugees, many of the IDP camps and refugee camps, 80% of them are women and children. And many of these are not just widows, but also half widows, the wives of the abducted and missing. And one was absolutely shocked last year that in the agreed conclusions of the CSW, there was no mention of widows whatsoever. And I just think that we've all got to get together, all of us, to look at all the other mechanisms that there are in the international architecture for human rights. So it's not just the CSW, it's the Security Council, the area meetings, the Human Rights Council. It's also trying to get 1325. We need another resolution. It's 22 years nearly since 1325, and widows are never at the peace tables and at these concords. So I beg all of you, wherever you are in the world, try and ensure that widows are supported. We need funding for widows to come together and have their own voices and their own associations, because it is the most neglected of all gender and human rights issues. And I beg you to go into our website and see the dossier. We need a general recommendation from the CEDAW. Yeah. And we need now the UN, I think, to appoint a special representative on widows. That's enough. Thank you. It's been a wonderful meeting. Thank you very much.
Margaret, thank you very much. You pointed very important issues, but I think we will organize more sessions in order to discuss more issues and to offer space to all people who is interested in this. Thanks a lot. Nurgul, you have a floor, but very quickly because we should finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I wanted to thank the Women's Major Group for putting this webinar, and want to ask and attract your attention to the issues of underinvestment in women's programs in our countries. And I think it's important that in this session, pay attention that indicator 5C1 should be tracked, and please include into your VNR reports. If government is not able, and in many countries it is not able to get the data, please get in touch with me and with CPD-FG group, and through Sheikhnaz, through Valentina, through many other people. We will be very happy to work together, because what all we are talking, political commitment more or less is there, but there is no financial commitment. There is no system change. We need to change. We need so that all efforts that are done to support women and to protect women, to empower women, should be fully funded. SDG gives this opportunity. We have to advocate and to work hard to collect data and inform and to press so that underinvestment was really addressed. Adequate funding was there. And SDG indicator 5C1 is one of those who can help. And also, it's not only VNR per country, but we can also, and we will be very happy to cooperate with Women's Major Group, my great friends, also to prepare reports, especially to the annual review of the indicator of the SDG 17, which is on means of implementation. Nobody is talking about means of implementation for women, neither on absolute its own goal, standalone goal 5, neither how they are funding through integration. Thank you so much. And I put a question, the same question in the chat. If someone wants to contact, we'll be very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurgul. Thanks to all. I'm sorry, but our time press us. I would like to express my gratitude to all of you. It was excellent discussion from my point of view, as I understand and as I see your comments in the chat. I think it's good recommendation, good, valuable points to restart our discussion at all levels, national, regional, and global level. Thank you very much to Women's Major Group. Thank you very much to all of your organization. Thank you very much to our secretariat, Sheikhnaz and Andrea. Thank you very much to all translators who worked very hard. And thanks to all of us for our efforts, for our activity, for everyday involvement in women's human rights. Take care. Be strong.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I would like to offer the floor to Sheikhnaz.
Thank you to you too, Valentina.
To the